Thank you very much. Yes, the session will be recorded and shared on YouTube later for those who cannot attend. Thank you for that, Levi. So, as I said, this is our 9th event with AI Think Tank. And my name is Adrian Lindqvist, and I will moderate today's Lunch and Learn. But before we go into the topic, a quick word about AI Think Tank. So AI Think Tank are the AI business consultant students in collaboration with AI Sweden. We plan and organize events where we connect to industry experts and discuss different aspects of AI. Previous events range topics like starting with data, AI and climate change, bias and ethical AI, and are all made available on AI Think Tank YouTube channel. This event is our first Lunch and Learn, which is a bit shorter, and where we invite an expert, a researcher, or an author to discuss one topic related to AI. The aim here is to learn, ask questions, and hopefully have some insights and ideas to take with you after the session, and also maybe put it into practice. I would like to start by thanking our partners, AI Sweden and HyperIsland, and my awesome crew, Masai, Levi, and Harris. Today's agenda is as follows. We will have a short presentation by Pontus Wärnestål, followed by a Q&A where you are encouraged to ask questions on the topics or if you have any experiences. And we will try to summarize it 12:40. We have a hard stop at 12:45. With that, our guest speaker, an expert for today, is Pontus Wärnestål. Pontus is an Associate Professor of Informatics at Halmstad University, and he is also an award-winning service designer and a human-computer interaction researcher. He has more than 20 years work experience in user experience, service design, and human-centered AI. He's also the author of this book, Design of AI-drivna tjänster. So it's only in Swedish at the moment, but I heard it's being translated, which I have right here and I truly recommend. Yeah. So with that, I would like to invite on stage. And we start sharing so you can take over.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.
And you're absolutely right. It is being translated by an AI and myself. And it's due to be released now in September, actually. So please keep an eye out. Yeah, so nice to be here, and happy to see so many people wanting to participate. And AI is, of course, a huge topic, and we have very little time. And I guess most of the audience today have some background knowledge. So in order to make use of our time here today, I will quickly move on to what I consider to be a very interesting, but sometimes neglected aspect of AI-powered services. So I'm sure you all have seen popular milestones in the AI field, like how IBM Watson won the Jeopardy TV show contest a few years ago, and Deep Blue winning against Kasparov in chess in the late 90s, and the Sputnik moment of modern AI when AlphaGo won a game of Go over the international human champion Lee Sedol in 2016. And Go is, of course, more complex than chess, and the way AlphaGo won was exceptional. The system displayed creativity within this narrow domain and performed exceptional moves and strategies that surprised the human Go community. And this sort of fueled the current AI revolution that we are in right now. And I assume most of you are aware of that the technological landscape for AI-powered services consists of these 5 pillars, if you will. And since roughly 2010, this is the AI landscape. We have available and accessible algorithms and neural networks, data that can be pushed and pulled on a global network with both mobile and stationary devices all over the planet. And it's powered by a fast internet and powerful processors and graphical processing units. And this is the technical foundation on which we run today's AI services on. And since 2014, the UN estimates that data flows represent more of the GDP than physical goods and products. And this is the technology landscape for AI-powered services. But the world is a place beyond this technology landscape. So even if an AI system gets high scores or metrics on precision, recall, accuracy, the service will eventually meet humans in the real world. And as you all know, humans are unpredictable and complex. And the real world is not a chess game or a Go game. It's very messy, and that presents a huge design challenge. This is a snapshot from the soccer game between Inverness Caledonian Thistle playing Ayr United in November 2020. And due to the pandemic, people were not allowed to visit the stadium and watch these games in this league. So an AI-based camera service was designed. And the company, Pixelot's mission was to train an image recognition model to follow a white ball on a green background during the game. And this is a fairly simple technical solution. And of course, the testing went great. And unfortunately, the real world hit the service later on. So the referee had the same haircut as I have. That means that we now have 2 white circular shapes moving across the field. And here is a little clip on how that viewing experience was. And as you can see, as soon as the player hides the ball, the camera moves to the referee, rendering the viewers to actually miss all the exciting attacks and the goals, but they got a really good glimpse of the referee at a lot of times. So the lesson learned here is that there's a challenge in being too eager in believing that we understand a job or workflow. And as soon as a task gravitates towards an open, dynamic world, the value of generality increases. However, current AI is still definitely narrow and specific, not general. And even if we might be impressed with AlphaGo and the complexity of the Go board game, we still have to realize that the Go game is still a discrete zero-sum artificial world, far from the complexities of the real world. And I mean, even a soccer game is actually clearly defined in terms of goal and where you can run with the ball and so on. So it's actually fairly narrow, and still an AI-only solution falls short, as you can see here. So in order to create real-world value, we need what's known as the teaming or collaboration approach between AI and humans. So teaming is a keyword here. It's a core concept, and it's necessary to design for teaming and collaboration between AI and humans. And that is necessary if we are going to create and capture value. Now, this little sketch here shows how value is created. Value is not inherent in any system or product. Value arises when someone performs an action that gives an impact or effect. For example, using a service to create that desired outcome or impact. Now, in good information flows, people actually learn from what works and what doesn't. and that provides even more value. And I want you to keep this general feedback flow in mind at all times when we design AI-powered services that aim to work in messy real-world situations. And that means that for real-world AI services, we need to look at what capabilities AI can provide for these information or workflows. So let's start looking at AI capabilities in, at least this is my suggested way of looking at it. I have three sort of pillars or three capabilities that we can look at. The first one is prediction. And they are detailed in my book. So if you're interested in reading more, you can read about it there. But basically, prediction is using known data sets to classify or predict previously unseen data. The next capability that builds on prediction is adaptivity. And that means that you can adapt these predictions to what you know about a context or a user, how it's modeled. And that's personalization and that kind of functionality. The third capability is called agency. And that's when services can take initiative and act on users' behalf based on adaptive predictions. And this is interesting for a designer because the design metaphor that we are trained in using is the tool metaphor. We are good, as UX and service designers, we are good at creating tools. However, as you move towards agentive capabilities, the design metaphor shifts a little bit and we move on to butlers. That's the metaphor because the agentive services, they are instead taking initiative, they act on our behalf while we are doing other things. And sometimes we check back with them and we perform what's known as takebacks and handoffs. I'm just going to briefly give one example each for each of these so that you really get what we're talking about here. Prediction is, of course, something you use daily, I guess. Predictive input when you're texting, for example. In this case, I've written vänliga hell, and then I'm expected to continue typing. And there are two predictions going on here in the keyboard. The first one is a word suggestion. So in Swedish, of course, hälsningar is a reasonable prediction instead of, I don't know, hälsema or whatever else starts with HLL. But the second prediction that goes on here that is actually invisible, and maybe not all of you know this, but the hitbox around the key S is actually enlarged in this context so that you will have a higher likelihood of hitting the right button when you type with your big fingers on that little screen. And this is one reason that we actually can type on a soft keyboard without making too many mistakes. This is language dependent though. So in one sense, this is actually adaptive. When I have a Swedish keyboard, you have another prediction model compared to an English keyboard, for example. We can also have AI predictions in chains, and as a core of the application, here is Google Translate, where the image recognition software is making a series of predictions. For example, the likelihood that what I'm looking at here are Cyrillic characters. And then the next prediction is a machine translation that has a prediction of what those Cyrillic signs would be in English. And then you can use augmented reality to overlay that on the image. And this augments the user's ability to, for example, walk around in a city with a different alphabet. Adaptivity is just moving on, like I said before, making predictions personalized in a more elaborate sense. And I'm sure you all have used this for several years. You have personalized playlists that are generated in Spotify, for example, and you get product recommendations. Your Netflix is different from my Netflix because we have rated and viewed different things and so on. So this is not a surprise, I guess. When it comes to agency, we need to think a little differently though. Instead of tools that we are using with all our attention on the tool, agentive systems typically work in the background, but they still need to be designed for interaction, because even though for example, the robotic lawnmower is doing its job while you are doing something else, you need to be able to communicate, and it needs to be able to communicate with you if it runs out of battery or if it finds an obstacle and you need to go rescue it or so on. Same with stock market advisors and robo-investors and Nest, for example, which is a smart thermostat for the house. So these are the three capabilities, and you can put them in a column here, and then make a distinction between what we call no human in the loop services and human-centered services. No human in the loop takes the automation route, and they are trying to effectively automate away people from the workflows. These are autonomous robots and vehicles and so on. And what I'm proposing is the human-centered or the teaming approach, where you're actually designing the information and workflow between robots and humans, or AI and humans, I should say. And then you can play with the abbreviation AI. You can call it autonomous intelligence, assistive intelligence, augmented intelligence, and so on. My point here is, and a lot of research confirms this, that you quickly hit a ceiling when you try to automate already existing workflows. There is more value to be captured if you are using the teaming approach. And this means that, remember the sketch I showed you earlier, if we introduce the AI part here, you need to build that so that the predictions that the AI is capable of will augment the human's ability to make these judgments. And also you need to tie back that feedback loop, not only to the human so that he or she learns, but also that the data can retrain the AI model so that the predictions get better. So both training of the AI system and the learning of the human needs to be taken into consideration when you design. So there are plenty of things we can say here, and I urge you to think about what challenges do you see in your particular space. And I think what I'd like to close on before we move on to the Q&A are these 5 challenges or different kinds of skill sets. And your organization probably needs knowledge in all of these 5. So for example, we need knowledge about AI, of course. We need to understand the basics of artificial intelligence. But that's not enough. You also need to be able to innovate and create these teaming workflows with humans. And innovating with AI is the second challenge. Now, because AI services are personalized and adaptive, you need to be able to prototype. And the prototyping and long-term evaluation is actually a different kind of prototyping and evaluation that you might be used to in classical static IT systems. And speaking of long-term effects, you need to monitor those closely, and you need to consider teaming and that the human is continuously learning. That means that not only does the AI adapt and change, but the human is also changing and adapting. So you need to design for these two for a long-term relationship. And this means that you will have different kinds of skill sets, different kinds of disciplines, different kinds of roles. And as soon as you put different kinds of people together, you have a communication challenge. So you also need to make sure that you address the challenge of how do we communicate across disciplines in our multifunctional teams. So these 5 are significant challenges that you might want to work with. So Adrian, I have some, more summary pictures to show, but maybe you wanted to do the Q&A now, and then we can end on the summary slide, if that's okay.
Sounds awesome. Thank you very much. Very interesting and great introduction to service design and AI. I would like to open up the floor to everyone. Please, if you have any questions, just either unmute or write it in the chat. Oh, we already have one in the chat from Freya. How do you work with problem number 5, communication?
Great question. And I really like that you're starting with that challenge, because the other 4 is dependent on a multifunctional team being able to communicate. So that's a really good start. Well, first of all, you need to make sure that typically the data scientists and the machine learning experts are typically the ones using the strangest language because it's so technical and new. So you need to make sure that when they start talking or using slides and so on, make sure that they are accountable for all the abbreviations they're using, right? So you might set up a little word list for what do we mean with biased data sets? What does that really mean? Because if you enter a room and you're not from a technical background and they start talking about biased data or data cleaning or whatever technical term they're using, or unsupervised machine learning or supervised machine learning, and you're not sure, you are probably going to be a little hesitant or afraid to ask because you don't want to sound stupid in that room. And that's a big mistake. So you need to make sure that everyone understands the terminology. Otherwise, you end up with all these, semantic dragons that take on mean different things to different people. And then your project is almost doomed, I would say. So start sitting down, establish the vocabulary, and also work for an open and friendly climate where questions are allowed to be asked. In Swedish, we say högt i tak, high ceiling, right? So I think that's a culture issue. So it's not only the words, it's also about the kind of culture you have. I can go on with the communication thing because it's such an important topic, but I think that's the basic first move to do.
Awesome. That's a really great start. We have one more. Please elaborate more on innovating with AI. So yeah. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So if you start with number 1, knowledge about AI, there are so many books and courses teaching you the technicalities on, what data should you have, what algorithm gives the best result, how do you improve precision and accuracy in your models, and so on. And that's great, but it falls a little short on actually providing value. And this is where the design-oriented methods comes into play, that goes out and do not start with technology, but they start with value. Actually, I'm still sharing, right? So I can show you a little image on what I mean here. Innovation happens in the middle here. And my point here is that you start with what is valuable. The typical, I should say, okay, let's go back. The typical way AI projects today are being introduced is from the left-hand side, because you typically have a technical solution that people are just trying to force into contexts. So they start with what AI can do and then try to put that into holes in the organization or projects. My suggestion is to start from the other way and actually do what design researchers and designers have done for millennia. They start with the problem and what is valuable. And then with using the understanding on how people perceive, understand, and behave in different situations using technology, you design for that, and then you use what AI can do to facilitate and make that better. So hopefully innovation, if you bring this perspective, I hope that innovation can be enhanced and increased a little bit. Hope that was an answer to the question.
So do I, but I thought it was a really good answer and great illustration as well. Hope you find that answer satisfying, Reda. So one more from Michael Svensson. Do you see any working examples of DAOs where you use AI? Thinking of the future of, for example, municipalities or governmental functions. Another merger with other tech.
Yeah, it's moving really fast. Perhaps not and rightly so, perhaps not in governmental and municipality, because governmental functions should be a little cautious. That's their role. So I don't have any examples right off the top of my head, but of course, if you are combining different new tech, I see a number of applications when it comes to blockchain in general using AI-powered services, because one of the problems with AI and with digital services is the ability to track decisions, right? So if you are looking for AI-powered decision support in governmental organizations or municipalities, there is a huge need for being transparent and being able to track those decisions. And that's, well, it seems like a good application of blockchain, which leads to DAOs, of course. And as Levi clarifies here, it's a digital, centralized, decentralized, autonomous organization. But that's a very, if AI is perceived as being a new technology, the DAO discussion is even newer. I would say it's a really immature so far. So I don't think that's ready to just be plugged into our governmental functions yet. They show promise, of course, but I don't have any examples of it that I've heard of.
Awesome. One more from Gabriella. Would you have any personal tips for methods to prototype AI?
Yes, I do. All of chapter 5 in my book is dedicated to that, but I can share my staple tips, and that's the method called Wizard of Oz. Maybe some of you have heard of it or maybe used it, but basically it's when you fake the AI functionality by using a hidden human. So a human role plays the AI functionality. And that has a number of advantages, but it also has some disadvantages. But the number of advantages are that you don't have to spend a lot of valuable resources and time to create a prototype of an AI-powered services. You can actually have a human who hopefully has some intelligence, role play the system functionality. And that way, just like in the novel, The Wizard of Oz, if you have the wizard behind the curtain, the authentic user experience will be as if they were served by an AI-powered service. That way you can learn a lot about how it's experienced to have this AI functionality. So I have a lot of different kinds of projects where we have benefited from learning a few very critical aspects of the service by just faking it. And then using those learnings help you to focus where the real AI development should be. You learn a lot by having a Wizard of Oz setup. So that would be my best starting tip.
That's awesome. Anyone else that would like to ask a question? You can either unmute or write in the chat.
I have a question.
Awesome.
I guess design thinking is the main or one of the most important methods, frameworks when designing AI-driven products or services. Is there anything else that you use, some other kind of methodology that is suitable when thinking about human-centric AI?
Yeah. Well, first of all, design thinking as a concept is really a bundle package, right? It's not one single method. It's a description that sort of communicates to non-designers how designers think. So design thinking, sure, that's really important, of course. That's the way we do things. We explore first and we base it on empathy with our users and all that, right? Of course, there is not one single process that is unique and that is the same for different projects. Process descriptions are only suggestions. Never forget that. You can have the best process in the world, but if you have a shitty team, it will go to the drain anyway. And you can have a sloppy, undefined process, but if you have a really experienced and skilled team, you would probably still build something great. But of course, what design thinking, if you model design thinking in the circular fashion, right? You've seen the linear description of design thinking, and you have the circular one. If you use the circular one, it's compatible with agile environments and processes. And I think that is really essential, because you need to tweak and iterate and refine AI-powered services even more than classical IT systems because of its dynamic nature. So I think you're in a constant iteration process. So if you combine design thinking, the linear kind, with iterative development, then you're pretty much set, I guess. But then it comes down to every unique project, the specific number of people and roles you have in it, the context you're developing for. So every process will be unique.
Awesome, thank you. Anyone else?
I can just add, because process interests me, I can just add that a lot of times it will also come down to how you combine different processes, because an AI-powered service is a complex beast. So you would probably have multiple processes that need to jack into each other. So and it comes down to the fifth challenge. How do, for example, data scientists, front-end developers, back-end developers, designers, and product management, how do they communicate about this? How do you convey a common vision clearly, so that all the teams can work together without too much friction? I think communication processes are really intertwined.
Awesome. We've got another question here from Hashim. What about value of AI in healthcare without the product interfering directly in patient diagnostics or treatment? Is there a gray area to avoid risk and tight regulation?
Yeah, awesome question. Excellent, because it really puts the finger on one of the more tricky domains, because it's so close to another complex domain, which is the human body and mind and how it works and functions. I would go back to this, and I've been fortunate enough to be part of a lot of healthcare applications, and I can post. I wrote up a blog post, and that case is also in the book, when we studied how AI was being used in the emergency room for an AI-powered camera that could triage the patients with all the vitality parameters. Oh, I see Levi has already posted it. Great, thank you. And I would say that the value, again, comes down to how well can you augment the human health caregivers' skill sets and work. If you move down to the no human in the loop approach, I think you are on the wrong track. I know some people would disagree with me, but I firmly believe, from what I've seen in the healthcare space, that AI predictions should support the human judgment. And there is a lot of interesting things to be done here. But that means that you actually have to really study what the actual workflow in that healthcare situation is, what the skill set and the judgment or decision calls that the healthcare providers are using and doing. And then you tailor your AI-powered predictions to support that, not replace it. We have seen so many times how the profession is being pushed back by a bad technological solution. So let's not fall into that trap and really take this image to heart. How can you support the learning for humans by boosting their judgment with predictions?
Awesome. So we have one more question from Freya. This is super interesting, and I would love to work with this in the future. How can I start, or in what direction can I take, like a role or skill? That
is such a great question. So I'll move on to this. Here you have some teaching resources that I suggest you start with. And this addresses challenge number 1 and possibly 2, knowledge about AI and innovation. There are a lot of courses, of course, but I am involved in the Meister program, where we actually have a human-centered design track for AI. And you can study that online, flexible. It's tailored for already professional people working and not full-time students. There's a podcast we did a couple of years ago now, but it's still relevant, I think. It's on dap.hh.se. It's called Human-Centered Machine Learning. It's also on Apple Podcast and Google Play. And then, of course, there is a book called Design of AI-drivna tjänster in Swedish, and it's released now in September in English, Designing AI-Powered Services. So those would be my first go-to resources. There are plenty more. Coursera has a lot of them, and so on. Also I forget the name now, the Swedish basic core elements of AI, I think it's called, right? Yeah. That's one that is more on the technical side. So that was the first part of your question. Your second part was the role or skill. And role, I guess if you're a UX designer or a service designer, you just need to adopt AI as the design material and start using that in your regular work. If you are designing interfaces, you might want to play around with what personalization would look like. If you're a service designer, you would in your customer journey maps or your service blueprints, you would draw in or design so that the AI workflow is supporting the humans that you are designing for. So I think if you already are in the design space, that's the way to go. If you're more towards the technical side, well, then there are the traditional way of going about it, being a data scientist and starting with the actual algorithm and data science part of it.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'd like to jump on. We have 1 more minute for questions. So if you have one last question, please put it in the chat. Meanwhile, related to the previous questions, how do you feel that sort of roles are merging and changing, both for designers and data science professionals and AI engineers? Because as you mentioned, the communication part is at the core, and sort of everyone needs to be able to understand these topics, terminology, and the AI as a design element, as you speak or write in the book.
Yeah. So I can answer in 2 different ways, at least here. But one thing that I think I want to answer in this way, I would encourage you, especially if you're starting out in the field and in the beginning of your career, do not get too attached to a certain role. And I know it sounds easy to say, especially for me, who has struggled through 20 years of the field, and I've had so many different titles and roles, but I'm still the same person, right? So my suggestion would be that don't lock yourself in and say that, okay, just because I'm a designer, that means I can not be technical. Or if you're a front-end developer, you think user research is too wishy-washy for you. Do not fall into that trap, because at the end of the day, your team consists of humans with capabilities. So instead of identifying with a specific role, identify with your capabilities and your person and your competency. Because I have been a hardcore embedded programmer, and I've been a researcher, service designer, and so on. And I think merging of roles is a natural thing in our field. When I started out 20 years ago, you were user interface designer, programmer, and interaction designer and information architect in one person and one role. That's harder today and maybe not even desirable. Now you can be having different roles in different projects as you get more senior, of course. So I would say, think about what capabilities are needed in your team, and do not lock yourself too much into a specific role and identify with that. be a slightly more open. And I'm saying that because I see a tendency that people they really want to focus in, and they get narrower and narrower. And I think we all need a little more holistic and open approach to what we're doing here.
That's a great ending for the Q&A. Thank you very much. We have 3 minutes to spare, and I would, may we share the slides with the audience later?
Of course, yeah.
Awesome.
I'll have a PDF of it. I just put up my last summary slide here, which basically, brings home the points that I've been trying to make. And you can just read them. But basically, AI is not a technical problem. You need interdisciplinary skills, and when you have a multifunctional team, communication is at the essence. The world is messy. I hope that message got through. That's why we need to prototype and evaluate. And I want you to think capabilities and user experience rather than features and product. One way of doing it is to start with a value and design from a human-centered design perspective. And also know that no matter how much you train your AI model, it will get things wrong. If we had a perfect rule, we wouldn't need machine learning or AI. We could just define the rule, right? So we are using machine learning for domains where there is a certain likelihood that things will be wrong. And that, for you as a designer, that means you have to design so that these errors will still be manageable. And augmenting humans is better than automating, so teaming. And then my 3 capabilities that I talked about: design for prediction, adaptivity, and agency. And sometimes play with the idea of shifting from tools to butlers.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for that summary. If I may just share a couple of before we finish up, a couple of announcements. Let me just.
You want me to stop sharing?
Please, if you can. Yes. Sure. Awesome. Thank you very much. Let me. Yes. Let's see. I can. Yes, so we will speed through. If you have the time, please do share what's your main takeaway in the chat while we finish up. And with that, quite briefly, our next event will be on the 20th of September. So if you have someone passionate and knowledgeable about AI that you would like to see there, please get in touch with us, both on the topics and speakers. There will be a live event at Stockholm Reactor. And do follow us on social media to continue the discussion, and Pontus as well. I think we have in the presentation your homepage and LinkedIn profile.
Yep.
With that, thank you very much, Pontus. This has been amazing. Almost on time, but I think it's been really, really interesting and valuable to get an insight on incorporating AI with a human-centric approach. So thank you very much. Have a great Tuesday, everyone, and a great rest of the week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.